You wonder why your quail are fighting? That's what we're going to discuss in today's video and get it all cleared up for you. Hey guys, welcome back to another slightly rednecked video. Again, my name's Chris. If you're new to this channel, well, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, your deck, your garage, or heck, even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it. We're out at the quail hutch today, and one of the questions I get asked quite often is, why are my quail fighting? It can look like a number of different things, and it can actually be caused by a number of different things. So to start off, the number one reason that quail fight is dominance behavior. It's just like pretty much any other bird. They do live in coveys in the wild, and I mean, these are domesticated Coturnix quail we're talking about here today. But still, in the wild, they live in coveys where they might have a couple of males and several females. But still, when new birds come into the group, then they fight for dominance. They fight to establish the pecking order, so to speak. So if you're mixing your quail, like you've got some new birds and you bring them in and you put them in with the old birds, there's almost always going to be some fighting that takes place. Now, depending on when you do that, depends on how much fighting that's going to happen. Usually, they're much more aggressive during the breeding season. So whenever your females are laying eggs and your males are crowing, that means they're in the breeding season. You can do that all year long if you keep enough light on the birds, 14 hours a day of light, or if you give them a break during the fall where you don't put any artificial lights on them and they just get natural sunlight. Whenever the days get down below about 12 hours a day, they kind of go into non-breeding season, I guess, for lack of a better term, and they're a little bit more docile at that point. You have a little bit better chance of mixing groups of birds together, especially if they're even numbers. 5 new birds with 5 new birds. Well, 2 groups of 5 birds that are pretty familiar with each other. You mix them together, you'll have a little bit better luck with that. There'll probably still be a little bit of fighting, but not nearly as much. Which brings me to the second reason that quail tend to fight. And again, it goes back to a dominance behavior. Whenever they first come into the breeding season, especially with younger birds, when they first hit breeding age, they've got, all those hormones raging through their body. They're just a little bit more aggressive at that time. And especially if you've got them overcrowded, you've got too many birds in a hutch, more than, 1 per square foot or so, and or too many males in the cage, that can lead to a lot of extra fighting. They just have, they just got all those hormones going through their body. They're like a teenager, at that point. And they just have a lot more aggressive tendencies whenever they get into that stage. Now, usually they'll calm down just a little bit as they, as the breeding season goes on. And that usually doesn't result in too much. Just a little bit of pecking. You might notice a couple of birds maybe got pecked around their eye or their face or something like that. If you just leave them alone, usually they'll calm down. They'll get over that pretty quick. They kind of establish the pecking order and everything's okay. But if you do have too many roosters, and I would say too many is anything over maybe 1 rooster for every 4 to 5 hens. If you've got more roosters than that, then that can lead to more problems with fighting because they're trying to establish their dominance to get the rights to breed all the females in there. And there's just too many roosters in there, if that makes sense. So they will fight a little bit more frequently at that. Now, I do notice that whenever, mixing groups, it tends to be a lot of the times the hens that are the aggressive ones. Whenever they have new birds that come in, the hens are the ones that tend to pick on the other birds to establish dominancy. Or again, if maybe they're being overbred because there's too many roosters, the hens will fight back and then they will pick on the bird. If you do have a bird that's injured, a lot of the times it will be singled out for picking on. For the other birds will fight with it, especially if there's blood present. They are, carnivores by nature, or actually they're omnivores, but carnivorous diet is a big part of their diet. So if they see blood, they will be drawn to it. And so if you have a bird that's really severely injured and has open wounds, then it's probably a good idea to go ahead and move that bird to another area, isolate it from the other birds, so that it can have time to heal up just a little bit, because they will tend to pick on those open wounds quite frequently. Another thing you might notice with your Coturnix quail is pulling feathers out of the other birds. It's not as much fighting, but it is pulling feathers. That may be an indication that you have too low of a protein in your food. Coturnix quail require somewhere around 26% protein. I like to feed a 30% game bird starter to my birds. But if you have something lower than that, say 22% or lower, then they may have too low of protein in their diet, so they're looking to get more protein, and they do that by picking on each other, pulling the feathers out, those kinds of things. So that may be an indication, that may be something that you can fix to kind of alleviate all that fighting. And sometimes you just get a bird that is just crazy for whatever reason and just fights with every other bird in there for no reason whatsoever, just because they're a mean, aggressive bird. We all know people like that. It's not unusual to have a bird like that every once in a while. And in my opinion, it's best to remove that bird from your flock, especially if you're going to be breeding and producing other birds, because those aggressive traits can be passed on to other birds, just like you can pass on more docile traits to other birds. So if you have a bird that's just overly aggressive and there's no real reason for it, it doesn't ever calm down, it just stays that way, my suggestion would be to remove that bird. Whether you call that, eat it, you know, sell it to somebody, just keep it in a cage by itself and let it live a, you know, solitary life for the rest of its life. However you want to handle that, I think it's best to remove it from your breeding program, remove it from the other birds, and don't pass those genes on to the rest of your birds. And there's one more thing that you may interpret as fighting that's not actually fighting. A lot of times you'll notice when the females are laying eggs, the males are crowing, and you see the breeding activity going on, you may notice the females losing feathers on the back of their head. That's not really fighting. That's just breeding activity. When the males breed, they grab the feathers on the back of the female's head. So, I mean, if you have too many roosters in there, you're going to notice that a little bit more prominently, but it's a very, very common thing, especially at the very beginning of the breeding season. The males just kind of get, especially younger males that have just come of age, they get a little bit over anxious with the breeding, and they will tend to pull a bunch of the feathers out of the back of the female's head. But again, that's not really fighting. That's going to calm down, and it's usually nothing to worry about. It just kind of looks a little bit bad if you're not used to seeing it. All right, so you know, I don't have too many problems right now with fighting. I do have one bird that got injured, but it got injured by a predator or something coming up through the bottom of the cage. It's lost a leg. Let me get him out here and show him to you real quick. Where are you, buddy? There you are. There you are. Shh, 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 shh. And you can kind of see here, hopefully. Let's show you real quick. He's got one leg, but the other leg is just completely gone. And he's got some sand and some things clumped up here around his vent. He's not doing real well. You can kind of see his eyes looking a little bit cloudy. He did get a little bit picked on whenever he, you know, he was pretty weak for a couple of days. I kind of let him be. Quail can be remarkably hardy. They can recover from some pretty serious injuries. So I kind of let him be for a couple of days to see how well he was going to do. He's actually looking a little bit better, seems to be recovering a little bit. I did not isolate him from the rest of the birds because I was afraid that when I brought him back in, then they would just go after him and really pick on him. And he seems to be doing a little bit better. I'm going to give him another couple of days. You know, if he doesn't really seem to be recovering, a little bit more bright-eyed, a little bit more active, he's still getting around and eating and drinking just fine. But if he doesn't seem to perk up just a little bit in the next couple of days, then I'm going to go ahead and call him from the group as well, put him out of his misery, because he really does seem to be, I mean, he's just not as active as he needs to be. But he is improving. You know, a couple of days I came out and he pretty much just sat in the corner with his eyes closed all day long. But now he's up moving around, he's eating, he's drinking. I do need to get some warm water. Try to get the sand off of his vent here, because it is, it probably will cause some problems. So I need to get him cleaned up a little bit right there. But that's probably about all I need to do, honestly. Poor guy, feel bad for him, but again, he seems to be doing okay. So we'll give him a couple of days. I have no idea what kind of animal got up underneath here. I did see a cat, just a feral cat, or probably not feral, it's probably somebody's cat that they just let roam, up underneath the hutches the other day, but I don't think a cat could get up there and get to him. So I'm guessing it's probably a raccoon or a possum or something along that lines got him. I have a solid bottom on this cage over on this side, and the birds are pretty good usually when something comes around the cages, comes underneath the cages, they get over there into that solid bottom part. He must not have made it in time. So something must have got a hold of his leg and just pulled his leg off, unfortunately. Like I said, poor bird. We'll watch him for a couple of days, see how he does. If he doesn't seem to be improving, then I'll just go ahead and call him out if I need to. Anyway, hopefully that clears a few things up for you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, God bless.